been a great week, and as you all know, this is absolutely my kind of weather. I love this time of year. You know why I like this time of year? Because it really makes me not want to go to hell. Because I'm pretty sure it's pretty close. It's been a busy week. It's been a great week to spend some time with our teens. We started out on Tuesday at the Summer Youth Series at Central. And then on Wednesday, we took them down to Benton, and they spent the afternoon and evening with the Benton Church of Christ youth group. And then Friday night, we took them up to Illinois, ignorantly, and spent all night playing laser tag in arcades. But there's one thing the teens and the other chaperones learned about me. Never to take me to a casino. Because once them tickets start coming out of that machine, I just keep putting them coins in it. It's been fun. But sometimes we find ourselves in situations that may not be a representation of who we really are. We may look the part, but maybe we're not really acting the part. On the screen behind me is what they call an Atlas moth. This is the largest of the moth-type breed. It is and can be up to 12 inches long in wingspan. And if you look at that, you notice something that looks a little familiar with the wings, right? Kind of resembles what? A snake. Well, the Atlas moth, that's its protection. It has no other form of protection beside the coloring, which reds, whites, and yellows to birds represents danger. But besides the coloring and besides the marking, that's the only protection it has in this world. But it looks the part. But as we all know, it's just a moth. A harmless little insect. Now, some of you, I know how you feel about insects, and I say it's a harmless insect, but if I were to have this 12-inch moth, that's bigger than a lot of birds, right? And if I brought that in here, a lot of you would be squirming in your seat if you were still in your seat. Some of you may be gone out of your seat already. But do we sometimes look the part and maybe are not who we look like? Do we get all dressed up on Sunday morning and put our Sunday best on? Do we maybe proclaim that we are somebody, yet the things we say and the way we act does not reflect who we say we are? One of the biggest hurdles, one of the biggest shortcomings, one of the biggest obstacles that the church has to overcome today is the stereotype of hypocrisy. You see, people don't want to come to church sometime because they claim the church is hypocritical. And we've all probably been in a situation where we have seen some of that ugliness come out in the church where we claim perfection, yet we're all still sinners struggling in those sins. So this morning I'd like to take Matthew chapter 23 and talk about the character of a Pharisee. What does a Pharisee look like? What does Christ reprimand them for? So if you have your Bibles, open up to Matthew chapter 23. One of the first concepts we see developed in Matthew chapter 23 is the idea that they don't practice what they preach. If we look in verse 3, it says, "So practice and observe what they tell you, but not what they do." Why is Christ telling them to practice what they tell you? Well, if you look in the previous verse, Christ says they sit in the seat of Moses. They're teachers of the law. Understand at this point in Matthew 23, they are under the old law. The new law does not come in effect till Acts chapter 2, till after he dies. So they're still under this old law. And he tells them, listen to what they do and practice what they tell you, but don't watch them. The character of the Pharisee is one who doesn't practice what they preach. You ever found yourself telling your child something and they look at you confused because they've seen you do something differently? Well, what about a coworker that you proclaim to them and they ask you what you were doing on Sunday morning and you said, well, I went to church, and they look at you like, huh? You go to church? Maybe you sit down and before a meal and you're in a public place and somebody watches you pray, and then after you get done praying, you begin to use profanities and gossip and talk in a way that does not reflect Christ. You see the differences in what we portray in our life when we don't practice what we preach. When we say something and we don't back it up by our actions. We see this idea develop throughout the pages of the Gospels, where Christ really gets on the Pharisees to practice what they preach, or to warn others, listen, don't do what they're doing. He says, for they preach, but do not practice. For they tie up heavy burdens that are hard to bear, and they lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with a finger. Have you ever tried to instruct somebody to do something, yet you yourself have not done it? I would be hard-pressed to go up this morning and preach a lesson on using self-restraint at the arcade. And those of you who were there the other night know what I'm talking about. Because it was like, I only need 5,000 more tickets to get this little speaker. And then I had 4,000 more tickets, and I'm like searching my pocket for another token, looking underneath the machines. Like there's a little kid that ran by, I stole his ticket. No, I really didn't. I wanted to. But we have to sometimes take a step back and say, is my words being reflected in how I'm acting? And maybe sometimes it's easy because we're able to watch when we're talking to somebody with a purpose. But what about those times that we have neighbors living next to us and their ears are open? What about that neighbor that we've been trying to invite to church, trying to get a Bible study with them? And we say things that don't really go along with that. How successful are we going to be if we don't practice what we preach? Turn over in your Bibles to Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. Look at verse 20. It says, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having the law embedded in embodiment of knowledge and truth. Then you who teach others, do not teach yourself. While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who love idols, do you rob temples? You who hate idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law? For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. What is our purpose? What is our purpose in this world? Well, if you look at 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 12, we're told to have our conduct holy. So when the Gentiles see us, God is glorified. We're told that our purpose in Matthew chapter 28 is to seek and save the lost, right? To go into all nations and make disciples. If we are somebody who has the character of the Pharisee, we may look the part, but we're not the part. We're going to have a hard time fulfilling our purpose in seeking and saving the lost. As we continue down this text, not only does the Pharisees have a character of not being able to practice what they preach, but they also have this desire, this longing to be seen by men. They have this desire that they want the pats on the back. They want to look the part. Look at what he says in verse 5 of chapter 23. For they do all their deeds to be seen by others. They make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts. The best seats in the synagogues they want, and greetings in the marketplaces, and being called rabbi by others. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be the center of attention. And right now, I'm going to be transparent with you. This is one I really struggle with. Being a preacher, I have you for 25 minutes, and sometimes I fall in the captivity of, look at me. And I want those pats on the backs and those good jobs. But listen, church, I don't want to be an entertainer. I want to be a preacher. I don't want you to come to be entertained this morning. I want you to come so I can give you the Word of God, so we can worship together. But it's tough. And this mentality went to the heads of these Pharisees. This idea went to their minds, and they wanted so bad to be seen by others. It says they made their phylacteries broad. Phylacteries are these little pouches or little boxes that they would strap to their arms and strap to their foreheads that would have scriptures inside. And when somebody walked by and they saw somebody having these phylacteries on their arms, and they thought, wow, look how holy they are. Or they had these tassels. I borrowed Dan's prayer shawl. Some of you, if you've been in his office, have seen this thing hanging in his office, and they wanted this around them, and they wanted their tassels to be long, and they wanted it to draw attention to them. Remember what Christ said in Matthew chapter 6? Remember what he tells them? When you give, what? Don't give to be seen by man. He says, literally in the text, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. When you pray, don't pray to be seen by men. Don't stand in the corners as the Gentiles do and heap up empty threats or empty promises with these fancy words. But what? For the Father who sees in secret will reward you. And then he talks about fasting. When you fast, do not disfigure your face. Do not make yourself look sickly looking, so when people look at you, they go, wow. Look how holy they are. Look how sick they look. They must be really into their fasting. Do we have the character of the Pharisees that we only do good things when we know somebody's watching? I've used this illustration before, but I remember when a man and I were dating. There was about the first year that I really wanted to impress Amanda. And then when I really fell in love with her, it kind of transitioned to really wanting to impress her parents. And then it got to the point where I was like, okay, her dad's watching. I'm going to make sure I open the door this time. Oh, her dad's watching, or her parents are home, so I'm going to make sure I get her home on time this time. We're people pleasers. Some of us more than others. And we want to please people. But shouldn't we want to please God more? Shouldn't we want to live our life so God is pleased? You know, somebody may not be watching us, but guess who always is? And that should bring me joy, and also it should bring me fear. When I know that God is always watching me, but I can see a Pharisee in my mind walking down the center square with his chest puffed out, with the tassels hanging off of his body, saying, listen, everybody, look at me. Look how holy I am. He says in this text, they made their phylacteries broad, their fringes long. They loved the place of honor, and they loved being called rabbi. I just want to be Dustin. I don't want to be Pastor Dustin. That's what I get called a lot in this world. Every once in a while, it's reverend. That word scares me. Some of you have introduced me as this is our preacher, Dustin. That's okay, but I'm just a guy. I don't want that character of the Pharisee that says, look at me. Because listen, I struggle just like you do. Because I'm up here and I've had the time to study this week doesn't mean I have it all figured out. Doesn't mean I don't struggle with those sins in my mind. But it does mean sometimes that the spotlight feels good. And it goes to my head. And I need to continually remind myself to not allow that character of the Pharisee, of the look at me type attitude to run my life. The Pharisees were so full of themselves that it doesn't matter how big or how great God is, they want it to be seen. So I have a little illustration for you. We've all seen these balloons. You all know what a balloon is. And if I put a little bit of self in it, it's still moldable. It's still flexible. And God can still mold me. But if I continue to put more of self in this balloon, and I continue to fill it of self, maybe the sin I want to commit, and maybe a little more of what I want to do and less of what God wants to do. Some of you are backing up. Pierce has got his hands on his ears. I'm not going to pop it. Trust me, that scares me to death too. At least I'm not going to try. But that's what we do in this life, don't we? We continue filling ourselves with what I want to do. And before long, we're so full of self that we are not moldable. And God tries to mold us and allow us to fit in His box, but we can't. Now, I could blow it up even more. But like I said, I don't want it to pop. But if we have the character of the Pharisee, I'm going to keep blowing this up. I'm going to keep blowing it up to the point of popping. To the point of you cannot move it at all. So what do we have to do then? We have to let self out. We have to die to self. For I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but what? Christ who lives in me. Well, if I've died to self, I got to get rid of self. So I could be moldable. So God can use me. If we have the character of the Pharisee, God's not going to be able to use us for His kingdom. In fact, if we have the character of the Pharisee, we're going to draw people away from His kingdom. People aren't going to want to be a part of us. And the more of self I can get out, the more flexible I become for God. And when we become flexible, and when God can use us, that's when the church grows. That's when people are converted. That's when the angels in heaven rejoice. But we can't be about the long fringes to be seen by men. We have to be like the deflated balloon so God can mold us. Because the character of the Pharisee, they're so full of self that they don't want to be molded. Finally, as we continue down Matthew chapter 23, the character of the Pharisee has a holier-than-thou type of attitude. You ever think you have it all figured out? I coached high school football for a while, and high school teenage boys have a problem with thinking they know it all. I remember I had a kid that came out. He had just recently moved to the area, and I was working with the wide receivers, and he says, I can catch everything. I said, okay. So I had him stand about 15 feet away from me, and I threw a football as hard as I could at him, and he dropped it. And I said, what happened? You can catch everything. And I said, there are going to be times that football is going to be thrown at you a lot harder than that. But he thought he knew it all. He thought he had it all figured out. Listen, church, if you think you know it all, you will fail. If right now you're sitting here thinking, I got it all figured out, I don't need to go to Bible study because I know enough Bible, you're wrong. If you're sitting here this morning saying, I think I have it all figured out and I could do it on myself, you're wrong. We will fail, but the Pharisees thought that. The Pharisees had it all figured out, they thought. And we have verse after verse in chapter 23 where Christ says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Look at verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter it to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Look at verse 27 as he continues down through these woes. Look at verse 27. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You were like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead bones. All uncleanliness. You think you have it all figured out? Do we still live this life where we think we got this? Or are there times that we need to be cut down in size a little bit? Humbled. Realizing maybe we don't have it all figured out. We need to realize that we can't do it ourselves. And we need to realize that we too struggle with sin. In Romans chapter 3 and verse 23, Paul makes a bold statement. For we all sin, and we all fall short of the glory of God. We all know that verse, don't we? I can see some of you lipping it as I'm saying it. We know it, but what happens the first time we encounter somebody with sin? Are we the first ones to point the fingers? Look at that guy. That poor guy, lost in homosexuality. And we condemn him? I can't believe they gossiped. Where were they at church on Sunday? They're going to hell. And we're the first ones to point the finger. And so were the Pharisees. But if we realize the verse that we just talked about in Romans 3:23, that we all sin, shouldn't we have a little more grace? Shouldn't we have a little more mercy that says they struggle just like I struggle? Did Jesus know the woman at the well in John chapter 4 was struggling with sin? Absolutely. But he sat down with her. And he taught her. Taught her the truth. In John chapter 8, we see the account of the woman caught in adultery. You remember what that happens in that account? Remember they come and they're wanting to stone the woman caught in adultery? And we think, yeah, she's wrong. That was the law, stone her. But remember what Christ said? Those of you without sin, cast the first stone. Maybe sometimes we need to remember that. You see, homosexuality, yes, it's wrong. Gossip is wrong. Murder is wrong. Adultery is wrong. Sexual immorality is wrong. Hatred is wrong. Anger is wrong. Drunkenness is wrong. Lying is wrong. Slander, jealousy, fits of rage. They're wrong. We know that. But guess what is in that person doing the wrong? There's a soul that Christ died for. So can you work with somebody who's a homosexual? Absolutely. And you teach them the truth. Can you work with somebody who lies, cheats, and steals? Absolutely. Why do you think Christ sat with sinners and tax collectors? Though I struggle. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 12, Paul continues talking about his freedoms. And as he works down through the text, we realize and we see Paul's main purpose of saving souls. That's his purpose. His purpose was to win some. So Paul says, to a Jew, I became a Jew. To those under the law, I became under the law. To the weak, I became weak. To those outside the law, I became outside the law. But he says, never outside the law of Christ. And my point is this. We have to walk that line. Yes, we can work with those sinners. We can eat with those sinners and those tax collectors, because our purpose, just like Paul's in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, is so that we will save some. But we have to be careful. Because as soon as we begin transforming and they stop transforming, we have to remove ourselves from that equation. But the character of the Pharisee, they just want to please themselves. They want people to look at them. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, for you look good on the outside, but on the inside you're whitewashed tombs. Do we have the character of a Pharisee this morning? Do we have one, maybe not all three of these, but maybe we struggle with hypocrisy. Maybe we struggle with the look at me type of attitude. Maybe we don't practice what we preach, or more importantly, practice what the Bible preaches. Maybe we look at our own selves and we say, what character do I have? I would encourage us this morning to look at our own lives and say, do I have that type of character? Or do I practice what I preach? Do I long for God to see me and not man? And do I look the same on the outside as I do on the inside? We have a great matter at hand to seek and save those in which you're lost. We have a great opportunity to shine his light beyond the wall. But we can only do that if we don't have the character of a Pharisee. The invitation this morning is this. It may not lend itself for you to come forward. But my invitation and God's invitation is for us to seek out internally our character. Are we living lives that are drawing people to God? Or are we living lives that are pushing people away from God? Don't live this morning with the character of the Pharisee. If you do have a need, if you need the prayers of the congregation, if you need forgiveness, if you need to squash out a matter, or if you want to study more, maybe seek out one of the ministers, elders, deacons, and let's begin that study. But if you have a need, the time is now.